Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, the Red Raiders get right with a road route.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And thanks as always for making us your first listen. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase with the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan. Great to be back with you, Chris. Chris joining us from the land of the Salted Lake, or the land of enlarged family, somewhere between Salt Lake City and Provo, as he is doing his part within this Utah two-step, as Grant McCasland and the Red Raiders continue their two-game trip. BYU coming up next, and we'll spend some time on tomorrow's episode setting the table for that matchup. On today's episode, we will spend some time in the land of football, as we've got some news from the weekend, last few days to get into, Chris, both concerning the coaching staff as well as the roster. A returning Red Raider, one that you kind of pointed to last week as a possibility, now we see come to fruition. But want to start on the hardwood, of course, because there's nothing to get you back to feeling good again like a 30-ish, 28-point road route, which is exactly what we got from Texas Tech over Utah. So Big 12 win number one on the board, and obviously feels good anytime you can say that, home or away, but particularly whenever you got to leave the LBK, man. What'd you think?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that you won the game. I guess I was surprised at how you won it. And so many times it's about context. But man, I thought after the game started a bit, and I thought, okay, they're scoring layups and really kind of doing what they wanted around the rim. And then JT Toppin picks up two very quick fouls. I think he played 3 minutes and then he was out. And you're thinking this is arguably a worst case scenario for you, but I think they adjusted, and I think the not that you're wanting to give up layups, but the plan, is what Grant was kind of talking to me after the game was over, and you kind of knew that, and it may be somewhat similar versus BYU, but you wanted to take away the 3-point line because this is an elite level 3-point shooting team, and you're about to see another one that's very formidable. They're going, these are two teams that have they're similar to you. They're going to have three shooters on the court at the same time almost all the time, and they get you spaced out, and that's what Utah was doing. But they were punishing you underneath, but then you kind of adjusted and you got it stopped. But McCowan, the big picture statement to me, and there's so many things to get into with this game, was the fact that you won a game like that in commanding fashion. And JT Toppin was, I mean, he was okay, but he was not, the headliner at all. I mean, he has 11 points in 13 minutes, and yet you didn't need him to be the hero. And I thought that's a really, really good sign for you.
Yeah, no doubt. I was kind of wondering if maybe we were seeing some of the fruit of those labors when JT Toppin was in street clothes. Maybe there's a little bit more comfort. I don't know, whenever he does get in a position like that. And of course, you don't want to be in that position. You already called it appropriately a worst case scenario, and something I'm sure it's going to be a challenge for him, just like most men down in the down near the basket throughout Big 12 play, trying to stay out of foul trouble and things like that. But I was wondering if maybe Texas Tech was able to lean a little bit on some experience that they had gotten recently whenever he wasn't available. You think any of that provided a boost in those moments?
Well, I think you nailed it. I think that the what Federico Federico did, and what the guards that had played with Federico in that 4 or 5 game stretch, they knew what he's starting to get comfortable with. And man, he was just lights out in the first half. I mean, just he was exhausted. I think he was exhausted from catching alley oops and hanging on the rim is what I think he was exhausted from. But but I mean, he's becoming a bit more of a force than I would have anticipated. And I credit Grant and Coach Linder for like putting him in these really good situations, and then he's got these guards around him, Christian Anderson and Elijah Hawkins, maybe two of their better games all season. But and I mean Darrion Williams, set him up a couple times, but it's just a two-man game in the middle of the floor, and that's what's fun about having such elite level shooters in the game because you can't help off. And I think it's a pick your poison kind of thing. And that's why that's why I think whenever you see JT Toppin on the block, they're just not double teaming him because nobody wants to leave one of those shooters to do it, and you're taking advantage of it. And I think the guys like Elijah Hawkins and Federico certainly they're eating, as the young people say. And he saved you in the first half. He really did, and kept you in it. And Grant gambled and put JT in the game at some point. I think there was about 6 or 7 minutes left in the first half, and you immediately go on an 8-0 run. And I thought that really
Mhm.
set the tone too for the game.
Yeah, Federico, man, he's been a lot of fun to watch, kind of develop offensively, and obviously there's some chemistry there with his teammates that's developing as well. Alley oop is a two-man game, and so that was nice to see continue to progress. I kind of wonder if you think, because defensively, I think his size is obvious, and he is able to get to some shots and disrupt some things. I still think there are moments where maybe from a physicality standpoint, he's being moved around a little bit too much. Do you think that could have something to do with the conditioning maybe that you're alluding to also, or is he just going to have, kind of a fight on his hands as far as that being an uphill battle, maybe being a little bit more physical defensively if he's going to play those minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point, but I think he was working so hard on the offensive end that it's hard to give that much energy all the time when you're not used to playing that many minutes. It's the most minutes he's played in his entire career, I think. But the other thing too is that teams like Utah, they spread the floor, and so they pull him away from the basket, and then you get switched on. So you're kind of in scramble mode, and they do a good job with their spacing and all these different things. And I think that's part of it too, because he only had 3 rebounds, but a lot of it, as we talked about on the broadcast, he wasn't around the basket, whenever shots were going up, because he's guarding somebody, semi out on the perimeter, and then having to try to get in there and crash. But it's just been fun to watch his development.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
keep in mind,
First, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app giving you everything you need for live betting, same-game parlays, and a whole lot more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, and make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
and keep in mind, and we'll talk about somebody here at the tail end of the show today as it relates to football, but keep in mind, this is because of this new rule, he is a player that can come back next year.
Yeah, he's in that category. I remember you mentioning him, and man, you think about he to this point in the season, I think, is trending towards the best season of his career. He may have already
Easily.
had it to this point. I don't know, but really gets you excited if you think about some extra time beyond this year, if all those pieces were to fall into place. And they are many, many pieces that have to fall into place for any athlete, as you know, Chris, to stay in the same place from year to year. So we'll see if that actually happens for him. You mentioned some of the guard play that was really nice to see. Particularly, I thought Elijah Hawkins was a lot of fun to watch, knocking down some shots from deep, had 8 assists against only 1 turnover. If you're talking assists to turnovers, which 22-5, I think, was the margin there for the team, but 17-2 between Hawkins and Darrion Williams. Well, I feel like Williams has gotten a little bit more involved in the distribution game this year than we saw a season ago. But before we get to D5, what'd you see from Elijah Hawkins that you felt like was maybe clicking for him and giving him one of his best days, or maybe his best day so far this season?
Yeah, and he's obviously limited with his size. Okay, we've established that. We'll keep mentioning it at times because it's noticeable. But what I liked, and your plan, that's the thing about a team like Utah, and BYU is going to have the same thing, is that they just have 6'4" or taller across the board. I mean, their point guards are 6'3", 6'4". So it's noticeable, and I think that they were running like a 5 out offense a lot of the time, and they're trying to pull Elijah away, and then get him whenever they get him matched up on who they want, they try to pick on him. Well, bottom line is he fought, and I appreciated it. He scrapped, he fought, he fouled a few times, four to be exact. But I just loved his fight and his competitiveness, and I thought he frustrated a guy like Miro Little and Sheriff Jantz, their point guard. He frustrated those guys. They were kind of starting to try to bump him and bully him a little bit. He just wasn't having it. But I mean, the best thing though is that what you mentioned, he hit shots on the other end of the floor, and then he facilitated. I mean, and he didn't turn it over. So, I mean, I think easily his best game as a Red Raider, considering the context of being a road conference game. I mean, he was exceptional,
Yeah.
and it's what you, I think, hope to add when you added him to your roster, is that he could kind of give you this, but in some ways he settled everybody down because of his ability to make shots and then get other guys involved on the other end of the floor. And yes, they tried to pick on him, and they won't be the only team that tries to do that. But he's going to scrap and fight, and I love it.
I love the chances for Texas Tech. Anytime the guy we already mentioned, Darrion Williams, is engaged to the extent that he was, and I think it's kind of a back-to-back game difference, a really visible example of what the difference is when you can get Williams going, or when he's limited or neutralized, like he was more so against Central Florida. What do you think, clicked for him, or what has to get to clicking for him to be a night-to-night guy that can make the kind of impact we know he's capable of?
I think the UCF game was more of an exception. I think he really has been a very consistent. He was your most consistent guy last year, and I think he's been that large in part this year. Now, I do think there's a bit more help offensively this year at times, and so he may. I don't want to say, like, take a back seat, or he may kind of sit and watch, or I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase that, or he may let
May
other
just
guys
defer
do
a
it.
little bit more, which is
Yes,
there's
that's a
like a
great point.
balance to find, but it's dangerous to not go too far into deferential mode.
Yeah, no, exactly, exactly. But I think when he's just got the ball in his hands, he just makes so many of the right plays. He made me a little nervous because he didn't come out of the locker room in the second
Yeah.
half to start the game, and we didn't, we were right there. We didn't really know why, and then I didn't think anything of it really after the game, and I still don't know why, because he came out, I think 5 minutes that he clips, and he was with the trainer, and he seemed to be fine. And he played the rest of the second half, and he played well, and away we go. So, but I was like, oh, please don't let something bad have happened here, because he took the last shot of the first half, and I didn't notice any issue at all. But yeah, he played really well, and I think he got the message from the head coach on the sense of urgency aspect. And I think Chance McMillan got the message from the head coach on the sense of urgency, because while we haven't mentioned Chance McMillan, because he didn't just have this big time game offensively, he just has the 10 points. Look at what he did on the defensive end, and their two leading scorers. He was matched up on one of the two pretty much the entire game. They didn't make one field goal, not one. And I think that he played 35 minutes. And those two brothers that were averaging, I think, like 17 or 18, and I think 14 a game coming in, were 0 for 6, I believe, and didn't make a field goal. Or excuse me, 0 for 7. So I think that's where the sense of urgency for those two guys, they clearly got it, but it was mainly on the defensive end.
Yeah, 6 rebounds for McMillan as well, a couple on the offensive glass. I think that's one of the more underrated aspects of his game. You think about the three-point shooting and what he can do offensively, but has always been a dude that gives a lot of effort as far as the glass is concerned, and we saw that again. So it feels good to get on the right side of things. There's no doubt about that. And one more name I can't go without mentioning, and I think you mentioned him already, but just another minute on Christian Anderson, who just continues to wow, I think, in a lot of ways. And maybe I didn't have high enough expectations for this guy coming into the season. I know some did, but man, he's certainly on the radar now if he was not on a particular fan's radar coming into it.
Yeah, he's very talented. I think the phrase that I use on the broadcast to describe him, just because he still looks like a young kid. Okay, he's kind of baby faced. He's slight a bit. You could just tell he's just still a kid. However, his emotional IQ is off the charts. He doesn't get rattled. You can coach him really hard, i.e., you can yell at him and get on to him, and
Yeah.
he'll be like, I got it, man. But he's just smooth, man. He just, the game is slowed down for him. He's just advanced, and it's no surprise to me. He really could hit those two back-to-back threes toward the end of the game that really sealed it, put it away. They were kind of daggers if it wasn't already to that point. But yeah, just love watching him play, and he's the point guard of the future for you.
Yeah.
And it's worth mentioning, as good as UCF looked against you, and then as good as you looked versus is Utah, as bad as Kansas looked against West Virginia on New Year's Eve. Like, you put Kansas and UCF, together in a game that was played yesterday in Orlando, mind you, and Kansas beats them by 50. And there's just something to be said about, like, the reaction to a loss in this league as we go through this, this gauntlet, if you will, for the next 2 months. It's sometimes that's why you hear coaches say, boy, it sure would be nice to get these guys coming off of a win instead of a loss. Because as you and obviously Oklahoma State's lost a couple, Utah's now lost a couple, as you handed them their second loss. It doesn't always play out that way, but it's certainly worth mentioning the overcorrection. And just because you are terrible one game and you bounce back, it doesn't mean you're great the next either. So we'll just kind of see what where the Red Raiders go from here, and as the league starts to settle in a little bit.
We'll spend some time on the next episode, of course, getting set for the next part of this two-gamer, that being from Provo against BYU, a scene that we've already experienced. But I'm curious, before we leave the Utes in the dust, Chris, what did you make of the scene as we kind of got our first taste of Utah athletics as a Big 12 member? Didn't get them on the football schedule. And coming through the television set, it looked like you had, I don't know, at least 15 or 20 in the building. So what did you make of the scene and the vibe in general in Salt Lake City?
Well, I obviously had never been here for basketball, had seen their football stadium from afar and seen their campus from afar when we were up here last year when we were playing at BYU. We actually stayed in Salt Lake City. It's a beautiful campus, but facility-wise, it's pretty interesting. Their arena has been there since 1969. It is, I don't know. I mean, I think they write in their notes that it holds like 14,000. I don't see that at all. But I'll take their word for it. But yeah, it was, I don't know, half full maybe. Not really impressive from a facility standpoint at all. And I don't know how much a commitment there is to basketball right now. It's almost as if Utah is kind of like Oklahoma in some ways, the way that they're school, occasionally they'll have a good basketball program and team and all that, but they really put the resources to football. But I can see why the folks in Salt Lake or didn't want BYU to get into a Power Four league, because a lot of that money starting to flow through Provo now, and you look at the state of the two programs, kind of where they're going. It's pretty fascinating because they are literally. I mean, it's about. I think we traveled yesterday. We traveled from Salt Lake to Provo. It's about 35 minutes. It's just not very far at all. And it was. I don't know. The folks at Utah are nice. Their campus it's like halfway up the mountains in Salt Lake. It's beautiful. And we passed right by Rice Eccles Stadium, there, which will be there next year. But anyway, it was an interesting. They were selling tickets for like $1. Like, why don't you just give them away? But I don't think there's many expectations for their basketball program, and I'll be curious how that is a fit as we go forward, because that could be one of the worst things for Utah men's basketball. You would think it would try to elevate it, but if they don't step it up, well, they're going to get their head kicked in by not just Texas Tech, but by everybody.
Yeah, feel bad for them. All right. We'll get back to the hardwood and get ready for the Cougars on the next go-round. Before we end this here go-round, we, of course, have got to visit Joey McGuire's football program, where something's always happening. And this time around, Chris, kind of just catching up on some things that have gone down since we were last together. We touched on this last week, kind of looking ahead to a couple of things. Further coaching staff shuffling, if you will, potentially a new hire or shuffling from within. We do now have a new hire made defensively, and could still be some shuffling within. And then also we pointed ahead to some eligibility that's impacted by a JUCO eligibility rule change, basically, that you broke down for us on an episode last week, and got into a category of Red Raiders that could be impacted by that. So we can start with Davion Carter up front along the offensive line, who is in that category. He's going to be returning as a Red Raider. Curious what you think that means for 2025 and where he could factor in after factoring in this season. Then, of course, also want to get to a new addition and a new safeties coach for Texas Tech defensively. So what did you make of the news from Carter, and how do you see that playing out as we get closer to the fall?
First, today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Whether it's sports, music, comedy, or beyond, we all love going to live events. And now Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature trims all the fat to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You'll always find can't beat deals. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
What did you make of the news from Carter, and how do you see that playing out as we get closer to the fall?
Yeah, that seemed to be the way that was going to trend. Now, I think it's important to note, in my opinion, I think, and I don't, we'll just kind of see how this plays out, because I don't know what agreement you'll get together with him on as far as big picture. But I mean, it's not going to surprise me if he's just here through the spring. I mean, he's not. You're trying to replace him, okay? I mean, I want to make that very clear. You are absolutely trying to replace him, and I think you did. And I don't think you're comfortable with putting him out there as a starter anymore, unless it's as an insurance policy and he's a reserve. So I think that from Carter's standpoint, I think he liked it here. I think he's a good player. He's just a bit undersized, as we know, and I think he'll be allowed to compete through the spring. Now, what happens in the spring if he's clearly second team? Is he okay with that? Can you do something with him financially and kind of go, hey man, we just we like you. You're not going to start, but we'd love to keep you here. I mean, heck, that's a win-win for the football program if you can keep him here as an insurance policy with all those starts under his belt and all this stuff, right? But I just want to make that clear that I don't know if he'll necessarily be here past the spring. I hope so, but also hope it's not because he earned a starting spot, or that means you've screwed it up with one of your portal additions, or somebody's hurt or whatever it may be. So anyway, that's a kind of a moving target a little bit, but it's certainly good news, and they make the announcement that he's coming back. So obviously everybody, at least initially, is on the same page.
Yeah, and just like the rest of us, everything's on a day-to-day contract, I guess, for the most part. So check back in with us in the spring to see what's shaking then. Also, defensively, we see an addition made in the secondary with Rob Green as a new safeties coach. What do you know about Coach Green? Sounds like there's a lot of familiarity with your new DC.
Yeah, I think he was at Wofford and Tulane, which is where, a couple of the stops that Coach Wood was at. I think they were actually after somebody different. I think they aimed pretty high. And that's not so there's always different ways you could put a staff together, and there's the butterfly effect and all those things. I think they aimed pretty high. They were trying to bring a coordinator in to coach a position. And I just think which was probably a pie in the sky scenario anyways, but
how pie in the sky? Was that like a Power 4 coordinator, group of 5 coordinator?
It was a group of 5.
Okay.
Yes.
Still pie in the sky, but
and it was somebody that I think Coach Wood is had worked with before and all that stuff, and this individual is very well paid and all that. But
Yeah.
it didn't work out, and so I think that you go get somebody that he's very familiar with, and I think Coach Green will do a great job. I mean, if you follow Tulane football, and it's not like I'm following the day to day with Tulane, but they've been a bit of a juggernaut in the last 3 or 4 years, and he's been a huge part of that defensively, just like Coach Wood was. And it's you knew Coach Wood was going to bring somebody, because there's an intriguing part about this whole thing that we haven't got to yet. I'll bring it up in a second, but Coach Wood was going to have a spot to fill, and this is Marcel Yates's spot essentially. But the intriguing part to me is I think Darcel McBath is going to coach corners. However, you have not announced that yet, and so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not what's happening, because I don't know what the holdup would be there, because they say in the statement, they go out of their way to say, and another individual will coach corners, and I don't know. It would seem it would seem to be that Coach McBath would he's been there. He coached the corners. He helped recruit one of the kids from the portal from Mississippi State. That the young man Bryce Pollock. I mean, he was like, "Yeah, Coach McBath, that's my guy. That's where I'm going." All that stuff. So, but I don't know what the holdup is. There's obviously something that has caused that not to be announced yet. But that's what I guess I was focused on the most. I knew about Coach Green. Oh, I kind of first heard his name, I guess it was late last week, and wasn't sure if it was official and where this was going. Obviously, there's also some news about Kirk Bryant, who was one of your offensive analysts, and he left to go to Midwestern State to be the OC. So there's a lot of moving parts. It just may not be at some of the positions that everybody is fully aware of.
Oh yeah, which is the mystery is part of the fun. So hang on tight, because there's still more mystery to be revealed or cleared up in some days to come. All right, Chris, appreciate the time and the insights as always, man. Enjoyed it. Appreciate some time from wherever you may be. I would say parts unknown. We know he's in the state of Utah, and hopefully not in a snowbank. I hope there's some heat wherever you may be, and looking forward to the next one. We'll set the table for some more Red Raider hoops as BYU fits the description of the next potential victim. And we'll see you then.
Yeah, man, sounds good. Yeah, I'm in Provo now. Salt Lake City is a great place, and I would go back there in a heartbeat. We just basically kind of haven't been to Provo for too long, but I'll be here for the rest of the day, and then obviously all day tomorrow, and then back home finally. But yeah, it's Utah. The weather's it's a bit chilly. The mountains are surrounding us and all that, but not a bad place to spend a few days. But I'll try not to get kidnapped or anything like that, and hopefully I'll be back with you soon.
And I do regret to inform any potential kidnappers out there, Locked On Texas Tech does not negotiate with kidnappers, so no ransom will be paid. Chris, get on back to West Texas safe and sound on the other side of this next one. And it's not often you got to go to Utah to warm up, but we're like on the cusp of a Arctic vortex here in the LBK. So you may check the forecast before you come back to the 806. Could be even chillier down here. But we'll keep a close eye on it for you and the rest of you out there. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time as always. Special shout out to the everydayers out there and, of course, the Matador Mob. Hit the show notes. Check out a link for a free 14-day trial, your direct line to Chris and myself with one-on-one text sent straight to your phone. For Chris, I'm Casey, and we hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.